Hello to everyone watching the School of Resistance. Today is already the 5th day. We are streaming live from the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. And it's a pleasure to welcome here with me, connected from Italy, Luca Casarini and Lorenzo Marsili. And shortly also Yvon Sagnier will join us. Perhaps let me introduce the School of Resistance and also what we are doing right here. The School of Resistance has been founded last year in order to bring together experts of change. And we have been discussing different topics along the last months, especially with activists, but also with researchers and artists regarding the suffering and we're observing in the world, but also the strategies to remedy it. And especially here at the School of Resistance at the ADK, Akademie der Künste in Berlin, we are also combining it with discussions on questions of aesthetics. And today is particularly interesting because we just had a conversation about aesthetics of resistance, and now we're talking about the revolt of dignity. So we are really talking from a perspective of activism and public engagement. My name is Martin Waldes-Stauber, and I'm one of the two curators of the series together with my colleague Kasia Wojcik. Perhaps let me introduce to you the first two guests tonight. Luca Casarini is an activist and publicist. He was an advisor to Social Solidarity Minister Livia Turco in the first Prodi government. In 2014, he narrowly missed entering the European Parliament. In March 2019, he led an operation of the ship Mare Jonio in the framework of civilian rescue at sea when it picked up 49 migrants near the Libyan coast. And now he is head of mission on board of the Italian flag rescue ship Mare Jonio, managed for Mediterranean Saving Humans, an NGO. Lorenzo Marsili is a philosopher, author, and political activist working for a future beyond the nation state. He is co-founder of the transnational NGO European Alternatives, and he was one of the initiators of the pan-European movement DiEM25. He earned his degree in philosophy and sinology from the University of London and currently serves on the board of the global NGO Civicus. Always these introductions seem rather long, so I would like to turn quickly to my first question. A book that impressed me a lot when I was a teenager was Stéphane Hessel's Indignez-vous, so a book about the personal indignations we feel. And I would like to start with a short question to both of you. What is the thing that triggers your indignation? Perhaps, Lorenzo, you want to start.
I think we've gone through different historical cycles of indignation in the very recent past. And if at the time of Stéphane Hessel, the main worry was to activate the social energies vis-a-vis a clearly unsustainable, unjust economic, social reality, today I think what worries me the most is a sense of despondency, even of despair, if you like, the idea of an inevitable collapse, an inevitable decay, a crisis towards which our collective agency cannot apply any transformative change any longer because it is too late. I think there is a real risk of depression as a psychophysical, psychosocial phenomenon building in a kind of acceptance of the status quo, which frankly we are seeing quite clearly today with the acceptance of the Mario Draghi government in Italy.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps to pass on to you, Luca, also a quote I prepared and I would like to share with you, because also we have so many books lying around here. You see the disorder we are creating at the School of Resistance day by day. And here I found this book of Artaud, and there's one quote that I believe it's pivotal, which goes, "I shall not feel fine, else I would rest and accept relief while things are bad." So what is the thing, Luca, that you cannot help seeing and which triggers your activism?
Hi to all, and thank you for this opportunity, for this discussion. The problem is this, that I think that the first thinking is that there isn't an out of world. We are in one world. This world is for all is the same world. We can stay inside the world and against the world. but we don't have a possibility of go away from this world. And the problem is this. For me, the problem is a concept of exodus in this world. We are inside, the world is one. We must stay against the world of injustice, world of racism, world of exclusion. But which is the street for exodus from this world? And I think the problem is this: is translation. We have objective, we can have objective, and the way we see look this objective, but the way is the problem. The way of life, the translation to the other world. In this moment, there is a revolution.
I would like to because now we talked about what triggers the indignation, and I think you opened already up a broad sphere of questions. But I would like to return to the title of today's discussion, which goes with the title of The Revolt of Dignity. And I think the word dignity is something that perhaps we talk too less about, or we just use the word. So I would like to speak with you a bit about what is your conception of dignity and what importance does it have also in our struggles? Whoever wants to start.
I think it connects with what Luca was just saying. I mean, this capacity of worldling, of creating the world. It's precisely what we are very much at risk of missing today. And that capacity of worldling, of creating an alternative reality to the one that is given to you, of course, speaks to today's topic, to the work that we are discussing, because it is the task of the imagination to perhaps open up not only such visions, but to open up the space within which to organize, to materialize those visions. And that's, I think, something particularly important in the gospel that we can discuss later on. But in order to create a world that is other, one must be able to say no to what is given to you. And that capacity of saying no, to me, is central to the concept of dignity. It is Bartleby's famous, I would rather not. Dignity is to empower people to be able to say no. No to exploitation because they have an alternative to being exploited in the factory or in the field. No to racial discrimination. No to gender discrimination. No to a political system that disenfranchises even those who seem to be rather better off in economic terms. And so this capacity of saying no to the thought of there is no alternative, of saying no to your predicament, to say no to your exploitation is what triggers the imagination and the power to create another world. And that is, for me, a central concept of dignity, saying no and empowering people, giving people the capacity of saying no.
It's true what say Lorenzo, and I think it's possible we have a vision of dignity in this way. There is a first step for considered dignity, for construction of concept of dignity in our minds. The first step is indignation. Is in the Bible, the name is splengizomai. What move us for fight? Splengizomai is love, feminine mother love for the son, and is a big push for not accept the injustice for the other. And the second thing is this: the dignity is possible. View the dignity only with the other. You have your dignity only if you consider the dignity of the other. Not is possible to have the dignity, individual dignity, because or alone abstract dignity. The dignity, human dignity, is a mirror with the other. If I can see the dignity of the other, I have dignity. If I not can see the dignity of the other, I not have dignity. I don't know what is.
But this leads me immediately to a counter question. So, are we losing our dignity because we allow suffering to happen? For instance, you are very active in the Mediterranean Sea. There we see the suffering, and not everyone is reacting to it. Or are we, on purpose, not seeing these images in order not to lose our dignity?
Luca, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah. You go, Lorenzo. Right.
Okay. No, the Mediterranean. I mean, I always bow to your expertise of that. Look, I think dignity works a little bit like solidarity, in the sense that, as Luca was saying, it is empowered through this reciprocal relation. When I act in solidarity with someone, take, for instance, solidarity within what used to be called the workers' movement. I work and I act in solidarity with a worker, with a fellow worker. I support their struggle. The same for, I think, the vast majority of struggles today. That solidarity towards the other comes back as solidarity, in fact, towards myself. Because by engaging in an act of solidarity, I construct a collective power, a collective energy that transforms the world in a way that improves my own condition as an immediate result. So there is this strange interaction of altruism and egoism in the concept of solidarity, whereby by leaning towards the other, you're actually improving your own existential, economic, social condition. In this sense, solidarity works a little bit like love. I think those who have children understand very well the pleasure, the happiness that one takes by seeing one's children happy. And that is at the same time an act of giving happiness to one's own children and receiving happiness by the happiness that one gives. And this reciprocity of solidarity, of love, I think it's also and precisely the reciprocity of dignity. And when we turn away, as you were saying, from all that is happening in the Mediterranean Sea, when we turn away from suffering, when we turn away from exploitation, what dies is not only that which we turn away from, but is a part of us. And turning away is turning away from something that is rotting and decaying within our own very self. So it is not just a moral imperative not to turn away. It is also an egotistical imperative, because that turning away is a turning away from our own internal decay. So for egotistical reasons, we should turn towards the other.
Especially if we take under consideration how the Europeans or the citizens of the European Union would like to describe themselves. So then it's even, yeah. Luca, go ahead.
Yes, no, I think pandemia is a good experiment for know very well this process of dignity. For example, and what say Lorenzo now, because pandemia and virus epidemic situation demonstrating that is impossible safe alone in the world because it's pandemia, it's global question. Also, I think racism is a global question, not is a local question or particular question. In our ship, in one moment in the last mission, we have a panel, and right in the ship, in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, Black Lives Matter. And we are connected with San Francisco, with Los Angeles, with Seattle, with the movement in the United States. We don't speak with the movement of the United States. We are inside. We have inside this movement in our action, in what we see on the sea, because we think it is a global question. And this problem, pandemia, make result of all, no? Economic situation of the person in the world is the problem, not only the specific situation in one town in Italy or in one peripheric situation. And in this way, we can have a universal vision of dignity. Is a movement. Dignity not is an article of the Human Rights Declaration. Dignity is a movement, is have life like movement, is composed by relationship, by experiment, by crash, by successful situation. Dignity is life, not only a declaration in of the 48 of the last century or other declaration. If dignity is only declaration, is dead. Dignity is action product.
I'm glad that you're bringing up the combination of different struggles. You, as an activist in the Mediterranean Sea, and the panel with Black Lives Matter. And perhaps, Lorenzo, this first to you. In French, there's this notion of convergence de lutte, so convergence of struggles, which is not that common, at least here in Germany, at least. I think and perhaps a question to both of you: how do you see the potential, and how can we achieve this convergence of struggles, bringing activists with different practices, strategies, and aims together?
Yes, and of course it's very fashionable today to always throw in intersectionality and so on and so forth. I think it's something quite old, actually. If you look at the way that Gramsci speaks about women's empowerment, for example, it's quite clear since the 1920s why the struggle for the emancipation of women is deeply connected to the struggle for emancipation of workers against laissez-faire capitalism and fascism. And that is, in fact, how revolutions are made. We know very well that Marx never predicted a revolution to happen in Russia because it was meant to be a dominant proletariat that should have driven forward the next stage of economic development, not an impoverished peasantry in a country that was a very incipient industrialization. And what the Bolsheviks achieved, if you like, is a convergence de lutte. They managed to bring the farmers, the agricultural world, Mao Zedong did something similar, within a revolutionary movement, within a revolutionary inclination. So this idea of convergence is absolutely at the heart of all systemic transformations in history. And I think there is something dangerous at the fact that we even have to build a theory about it, because it's to some extent a kind of neoliberalization of struggle, where I can struggle for my own individual empowerment as if it were a separate compartment from the struggle of somebody else. And we go back to this idea of dignity and solidarity as being a reciprocal approach, a two-way movement. So I think today, absolutely, the key, and there are people who are working on this much more than I am, is to tie in not only the logic of the climate movement, Fridays for Future, the anti-racist movement, so on and so forth, but to also tie in ways of organizing and mobilizing. And this is why it's very important, the flag that Mediterranea has put on their boat, Black Lives Matter, because it is not just a question of theoretical convergence, it is actually a question of bringing together movements that can build the kind of momentum, the kind of force, the kind of pressure that is able to reignite a systemic transformation in our societies. We need something that is very much large scale to fight against what is 20 years now political stagnation in our continent. And it's only going to be achieved by this kind of convergence. I think this is the terrain, actually, where theoretical and political investments needs to be applied today.
I apologize for my bad English. I have a little dignity in my English, but okay, you can help me.
No, Luca.
Non ti preoccupare, si capisce tutto.
No. Okay. I try to make a new vision of convergence. Convergence is the problem because we have power when we are all together. We have big power. It's obvious this. But convergence not is. I think in the past we try to have system of convergence between movements, different movements, and so, and not is so easy one, and is the past. I think we are now inside a new world. For example, communication is a platform when we are together, all the world is connected by communication. All the exploitation is have a governance by communication. Our work, our exploitation, our of all in every part of the world. In India, in this moment, there is a big movement of farmers and workers of the land. Is big movement. Myanmar, there is a movement against the dictator, puship, and so there is many action, many moments, and I imagine that this human movement is a network, and the problem, the communication is the kind of the way for have one organization of convergence, and we must work very well in the communication narrative situation about our action. And action is the moment of attraction, attention for the other. And this problem, what is this problem? That we, for speak with the other, for have a relationship with the other, we can speak from our actions, not from our words. And our words can have weight in the network, and can have exercise attraction for the other if our action is strong, no, is intelligent, or is strange, or the other. And in this way, we have convergence. Is a temporary convergence, limited convergence, but we are together. We have this perception. There isn't a hour X. We are now together, but we recognize the other in the network. In this way with action. When we start Mediterranean, we say our words against Salvini, against racism, against against the dishumanity of the deads on the Mediterranean. Our words, our denunciation, our indignation by social, not is like empty words. We need action for speak, for example. This is the way for create convergence, I think, and for recognize the other, no? And the other recognize you.
Once upon, sorry, just to, Luca said, once upon a time, in a certain sense, it was easier, and I was mentioning Gramsci, but when you had a strong ideology, so Marxism would provide a strong glue, and there are very interesting debates within feminist organizing as to what extent Marxist theory and a structural economic understanding of exploitation through gender discrimination can be applied, and to what extent it's an insufficient lens to look instead at something that is particular and not merely reducible to a Marxist analysis. But nonetheless, there was some element of holistic, overarching ideological glue that could help weave together those struggles and those energies. And that kind of ideology, of course, in today's world is no longer present, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it is our generational task to imagine what kind of glue can be resuscitated in order to bring those struggles together, maybe in a way that is even more structural than what Luca said, which I think is absolutely necessary and still absent today to a large part. But this question of post-ideology, for me, is very much connected to this question.
I'm sure we will return to that, and also there will perhaps even the concepts we're talking about today, like dignity, and also we will talk later about the new gospel. Perhaps the resources for such a glue come from somewhere completely different, as we might imagine. Perhaps it's not a hyper theory, but something very fundamental. I think Yvon is now connected to us, and I hope he can hear us. I would like to shortly introduce him to our audience. Yvon Sagnier,
yes, I can hear you all right.
Is an activist. In 2011, he became the spokesman for the farm worker strike at Boncuri Farm in Nardò. He worked as a trade unionist for the Agricultural Workers Union and is one of the founders of the International Anti-Caporalato Association, NOCAP. In 2017, Yvon Sagnier was awarded the Italian Medal of Merit, Cavaliere dell'Ordine al Merito della Repubblica, by Italian President Sergio Mattarella. In Milo Rao's The New Gospel, and we will for sure talk about this as well, Yvon performs as himself and as Jesus Christ. And I would like to welcome you, Yvon, and I hope you can hear and see us.
Hello, and thank you very much. I can hear you all right, and I'd like to take the opportunity to apologize to the audience, because in Italy, in particular in the south, it is not easy to travel around at the moment. So I'd like to ask you to accept my apologies to the organizers.
But perhaps you want to share what you were doing, because it's very much connected to your work of activism.
Yes, that's right. So I traveled to eastern Sicily because I was supposed to meet farmers there in the next few days, workers and farmers on the ground. So, and we are involved in a struggle for a more equitable, fairer agriculture.
We will for sure return to this to your work later in the conversation, but I would like perhaps to start with the same question that we started together here in this round. And perhaps I rephrase the question this time again, but with taking one quote Milo said when describing the School of Resistance. I quote, "Somehow it has happened that despite our intelligence and capacity for love, we live in a system of exploitation that will amount to destruction of the planet in the very foreseeable future. And although we know this, we do nothing about it." And I would like to ask you, Yvon, what is your observation, what is your indignation that gives you the energy to work as an activist? Or which makes it necessary to continue your struggle?
Well, of course, it all depends on each and everybody's culture. So culture is highly important, education and instructions we've all received. So we've all got our own particular visions, and it all depends and hinges on education that we benefited from. And this is quite fundamental and material for us as we're now adults supposed to educate and train our little sisters, little brothers, younger people, so as to achieve a certain vision of the world, and in order to convey also a certain world vision based on social justice, based on respect of law, of the Constitution, also geared towards loving one another, charity. And my vocation is also a religious Catholic one as well. And whenever I encounter injustice, well, I react with these values with which I have grown up. And whenever I'm faced with injustice, and this is what I've experienced also here in Italy, this is what pushes me forward. This is what inspires me to struggle, and this is my heritage that I've grown up with, and it is very strong. It is rooted in my own personality, and for me it's a Marxist vision that this has given rise to. It's also a Christian spirit that I'm inspired by, and this is what, in a nutshell, motivates me to do whatever I'm doing today. And my everyday business is based on all of this. This is some sort of a heritage that older people and before me, Thomas Sankara, Marx, Nelson Mandela, also inspired me with.
Perhaps we start into looking what you are doing And perhaps I have to rephrase in a different way. The context in which we are talking right now is the school of resistance. So let me ask you, what is your understanding of resistance? What are your strategies, your methods, your practices? Perhaps, Luca, you want to start also with regards to your work in civilian rescue at sea.
We start with this action. We define this action not governmental action, NGO in this sense. And we start because we move by the first by indignation, because there is in the October in the 2018 the maximum level of pushback politics of from Italy and the European Union against migrants, brothers and sisters that try to escape to the concentration camps from the torture, from the violence through the Mediterranean. And the institution tried to build a border on the sea. And this is very interesting process, because construction of border is one of the way for don't recognize the dignity of the persons. And in this sense, no, the discourse that I say before, the mirror, they don't want mirror, want wall. Wall, you not can see the person, you not can have the perception, you not can have obvious denunciation, you not can have valuation, you don't see anything. Is the modern way for the war, no? Is the game, is like a game. The migrants person that walk for many months in the Balkanic route and try to cross the border for safety, call this action game. Is the game. Is like a game against the person, and the result of this horrible game is deaths, thousand deaths. And this death is like my son, not is like strange people. No, it's like my son, my brother, my sister, is like me. I live in Sicily. I live 2,050 kilometers from the detention camp in Libya. Not live 1 million of kilometers from this horrible situation. This situation is paid by Italy, by European Union, and try to building a border on the sea. This situation have a contradiction, because there is international water, there is international law for the obligation to search and rescue person on the sea. This is international law against the refoulement, massive pushback from the state. And they try to change this law, international law, and we try to resist. But in this action of resistance, with a ship, with action on the sea, we go. We don't wait that the people, like in Roulette Russa, the people safe coming. No, we go in this direction, and we want help these people to escape from Libya. It's like Auschwitz, I think, in the other history. Not is the same. No, I don't want to make
these comparisons. Yeah.
Yes, but I think for us it's very important to have in mind that European Union built the possibility of have a European Union is linked to this horrible 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 situation like Holocaust, or like Auschwitz, Birkenau, and so. And I think if we live in that period, we try to help the person that tried to escape from the camp. And it's the same for me now. On the sea, we go with the ship. We don't have money. We don't have anything, but we have this indignation. We move from this and search link with the friends, with all, and pay the ship with borrow by Ethic Bank with the project, and go on the sea in the moment, in the maximum moment of this politics from Salvini and other right-wing parties' action against our brothers and sisters. And this is very important, because we know now 2 years of activities on the sea. We know many persons. We know many activists all over the Europe for this. We have now a network of NGO with 8 ships, search and rescue ships, and 3 plane for monitoring, and 1 telephonic control room. And we self-organize the system for help brothers and sisters and resist. But this is also project. Not is only resistance, is also a new vision of Mediterranean. This is very important.
I also understand that you conceive resistance as something to restore dignity. And I mean, that's also why I briefly interrupted you. I think these historic references are problematic, but what you made clear is that we live in a European Union which defines itself more by what it excludes, by what it makes invisible, than by what it makes visible, in order also to have this reciprocal relationship of dignity and of solidarity. And this is problematic.
Martin, this happened the same also in the camp in the land of Foggia, of Sicily, for the workers, and even fight for this, because the invisibility is the first, don't recognize dignity, because it's not person, not human person, is only numbers.
Yeah. We will turn in short to Ivan, but first, Lorenzo, perhaps to you. What is your perspective on the word or the concept resistance, and also what are the strategies of a philosopher and a writer regarding resistance?
First, let me say that I think the work of Mediterranean and the other search and rescue missions is one of the most inspiring political developments of the recent years. I think we've all been part of several movements, of protest actions, of solidarity actions, but I think what we're witnessing since a couple of years in the Mediterranean, the self-organization that Luca was just mentioning, is not only a great source of inspiration, but also a great source of good. And too often when you work in activism, and even more so if you work in theory, there is a kind of sense of helplessness and detachment from what you're talking about or what you're protesting about, to actually your inability to do anything to limit or reduce the suffering that you are addressing. And Mediterranean managed to make the jump between merely advocating or protesting to actually, even at small scale, reducing the gross amount of suffering that we're witnessing literally a few miles from the frontiers of the European Union. I think this is absolutely a best practice that, if we found ways of replicating in other sectors of political organization, would be actually quite a powerful innovation. It's something, incidentally, that many groups in the past have done, including groups that one may not necessarily like, where support for the local terrain, for local communities, was part and parcel of a political demand, whether that demand was correct or wrong. It goes from Hezbollah to mafia, actually. This idea of actually helping in reality and not merely in advocacy. Then briefly, I think it's not so interesting now to philosophize too much, but I think what I believe is that there is a risk of falling into a kind of literally tragic moment where the prophecy of a coming, a looming catastrophe, the line that you read from Milo Rau just a while ago, becomes an inevitable self-fulfilling prophecy towards which we are unable to offer any resistance of sorts, and we are in the role of a tragic hero who tries and moves and organizes and mobilizes, and yet you always get the next Draghi. You always get the next round of slightly more decayed normality until at some point something cracks and the prophecy of the catastrophe is realized. I think trying to understand how one moves away from this tragic inevitability is part and parcel of what theory should be applied to today. And for my part, it's got to do with the limits and I think the terminal decline of the national dimension as the dimension within which politics is organized and conducted. I think for as long as we politically organize, we politically fight, we struggle, we develop policies within a national level, there is always going to be a disconnect, a tragic impotence of actually applying any agency, which means any human contribution to a systemic transformation of this world marching towards a looming catastrophe. So constructing transnational forms of organizing, transnational political forms, whether that is at the institutional level, at the level of cooperation that the Red Sea and the search and rescue missions that Luca was discussing represent very well, whether that is connecting migrant workers in Tunisia and Sicily to fight against caporalato and exploitation. Those connections, I think, are what will define our capacity to stop the prophecy of Tiresias from actually materializing.
Thank you for that perspective. Then I would like to turn to Yvonne. Perhaps you want to share also, what are your practices, what is your form of living forms of resistance, and perhaps you also want to go into the functioning of the NoCap Association and the work you're doing there.
Well, I come from a country and a continent that suffered a lot. So we experienced colonialism, imperialism, and our people, just like most of peoples, have experienced, witnessed suffering, but also resistance as basic values, as a basic value. And this is what pushes me forward in order to do what I'm doing right now, just as I told you before. NoCap. Well, when I first arrived in Italy, I've all of a sudden realized how unfair the situation was, how much people were exploited, workers lived in unfair conditions, high level of injustice, marginalization in society, workers working in opposition to big corporations, but living off starvation, wages, meager wages. So this is what I recognized straight away, this injustice in the country. And then I did the maths, which was quite straightforward, the thing to do. And I just had to revive this culture and this value that I've had in myself, that was inherent to myself. I organized a strike in order to protest against this situation. But then I am a trained engineer as well at the Turin Polytechnical University, and there I also got to know about struggles, what form struggles can take, and I realized that we have to move on from protests to proposals. So moving on from just complaining about things, denouncing things, protesting towards something more concrete, specific, walking the talk, taking action. Of course, it is quite straightforward and justified to condemn things, but we have to come up with alternative solutions in order to make for a better world. It's not just about telling beautiful stories, but you would have to put those things into practice, into reality. And this is what I started out doing, basing myself on the experience that I witnessed myself, and being also an activist for agricultural workers myself. So I realized that today, those that are responsible for workers' exploitation are not just caporali and farmers, but of course farmers and caporali also represent a bigger cause, the economic system as a whole, the ultra-capitalist system, that is, which has only got one vocation, which is the law of maximizing profits. And today we're faced with these huge multinational corporations that are active and that actually rule agriculture in the world today. So land is managed by just a handful of persons today, multinational companies in that instance. 10% of multinationals today manage almost 80% of the land, of the agricultural land in the world. So what we find in big supermarkets, where we are used to buying our food, is just provided and produced by those companies. And I told myself, well, it's no use to just struggle and fight against the caporali and the farmers themselves, which are at the lowest level, but we would have to move up and fight against the system as such. And this is what I geared my fight towards, against these big multinational companies and supermarkets that dictate and impose their rules, that dictate prices for produce. And it's those people that decide about the price, about the value, and what a tomato is worth, for instance, or a kilogram of tangerines. It's those persons who dictate their perverted system that they created for themselves, because their law suggests, actually, or according to our law, we would suggest that the producers from Sicily, from Calabria, from Africa, or from South America producing cocoa, coffee, and tomatoes. So our logic would read that these producers should be able to decide about their prices themselves. But we are now faced with a system in which it's not those people who decide, but it's also purchasers that decide. So the system as such is perverted and illogical. And so we decided, and I decided, to make a difference, to change that situation with no cap. So what did we do? We decided to talk to the population on the ground and to the consumers also in this instance, because consumers have the power to impose their own rules, because if there is no such thing as an awareness on the part of the citizens and consumers, I mean, there are 80 million persons in Italy having to eat and drink every day and going to the supermarkets, shopping for things. And if they don't raise questions, if they don't ask themselves about where the tomatoes that they're buying come from and how they're produced and how they were actually grown, if there's no such thing as a collective awareness on the part of the citizens and consumers, the ultra-liberalist system imposed by multinationals and big supermarkets will keep on exploiting persons, be it farmers, be it workers. So this is how we keep up our struggle, and we're focused on the entire agro-food chain. It's from A to Z. So I'm starting from, of course, workers' rights. This is my foundation, a labor code which helps us to build up a fairer system, but what's happening today in the market economy is that the market dictates rights and legislation determining the value of services and products. And what we do is to impose new rights. We want to push for a minimum wage, a minimum threshold that you can not actually undercut, so that people can make a decent living. Because if you sell products at too cheap a price, it will mean that workers cannot actually live off their wages. So we take positions, we take a stance, and we go and see purchasers, consumers, buyers, and tell people, well, see, products have to come at a certain price, because that would be decent for farmers and workers. It would actually promote fair and equitable farming. So this is the technical part. We also introduced a brand that would help consumers and buyers to find orientation and to identify products and make a difference between products derived from an abusive system and from a fair system. So this helps to raise awareness, not only a philosophical awareness, but also material awareness, because we've issued our own products, released our own products with our brand sign, with our label. And this helps us to have a more participatory movement and to identify fair products.
Thank you for giving us this insight, and also for the audience. You find information if you search No Cap Association, you will find more information on this, and particularly for the German-speaking audience today. If you go on the webpage www.dasneueevangelium.de, you will find also further information on how to support the No Cap Association. Yvonne was mentioning the personal responsibility we have as consumers, but also in different structural elements of how, in which context we are moving, and the branding would be probably something in between, mediating. Lorenzo, perhaps to you, what is the relation between individual responsibility and the necessity to actually organize forms of solidarity? How can we navigate these two poles?
Yes, I don't give a fuck whether you recycle or not, as long as you join the revolution, is tendentially my attitude. But I think what Ivan was saying is very important, because it's actually the way that capitalism has sold mass impoverishment and is sustaining itself vis-a-vis mass impoverishment. It's a kind of compensatory capitalism, where the compensation is tied to a system of slavery. This is not just something that happens in the agricultural field, but think what happens in the fashion industry. We have generations of precarious workers who are denied the stability that would enable them to set up a family, to know what is happening in their middle age and in their old age, who, especially in the south of Europe, face a future where even the right to a pension is being put in doubt, but they're able to go and engage in very high-class compulsive shopping, because we can sell for €3, for €5, shirts and garments at the likes of Zara, H&M, so on and so forth, which are made precisely with the semi-slavery conditions that Ivan was mentioning in the case of agriculture, but in the case of garment production, especially in East Asia. And we have a system whereby this compensation serves to keep the pretense that capitalism is working for a majority, because you have some vestiges of what used to be a bourgeois lifestyle. You can buy clothes, you can buy tangerines, you can buy even strawberries out of season, and yet perhaps you're paid a mini job salary, your work is precarious, your pension is denied. So there is, I think, a very close connection between what Ivan was mentioning and the way that capitalism sells itself today, at a moment when it's not delivering for a majority. And I think precisely to conclude, what Ivan was saying is the heart of the matter. It's important to shape one's own behavior in accordance with the fight that one is leading. That is not something so important to actually drive change, in my mind, but it's very important for credibility. So it must be done in order to be credible with what you say and what you do. But it's not going to be an organization of consumers, which is too easily manipulated into the kind of bioeconomy that, especially in Germany, is thriving, that is going to lead change. Change requires political fights, it requires conflict, and it requires the capacity to attack the structural dimensions of production, precisely in the way that Ivan was mentioning. And we need to be able to say things that are unpopular, like some goods should cost more. You should not be able to pay 3 euros for a shirt. And then if the counter-argument goes, yes, but then poor people will be worse off, that is precisely the contradiction that one needs to break. Yes, that is the case, but that is why we need free and universal transport systems, for example, so that the money that one saves on transport, one can use to pay a fair cost for mandarins, so that the workers can be paid themselves a fair salary. So it's this connection of an unjust system used to pacify social conflict and to keep the pretense of a functioning capitalism that we need to be able to untangle. Changing our behavior is key for our credibility to be credible actors of a structural revolution, not merely enlightened consumers who are very happy to showcase their bio products in Prenzlauer Berg.
No, I mean, it's great how you're pointing out also that we as dormant consumers are part of an economy of suffering, and most of consumers are themselves not gaining from this mechanism, but they just being compensated. And I also think it's particularly important that you're pointing out how perhaps things are a bit different north of the Alps. Because I also feel that this question of personal responsibility as a consumer combines ecological thinking on the other one hand and moralizing questions on the other. And moralizing this question of how you consume also inhibits an actual political fight or discussion or questions of structural change. So this is probably a discussion we would need much more, especially here. And you are pointing Prenzlauer Berg, which is close from where we are right now. Now, I would like perhaps to switch to a different part of our conversation. Yvonne, before you joined, we were already talking about this, and the next question would go to Luca, because we started to talk about dignity, and we mentioned the New Gospel. And I would like to ask you, Luca, what you see in this reference, which was so important for the work which we will show this afternoon, the movie, The New Gospel. What notions, what forms of inspiration, perhaps also regarding to the concept of dignity we already talked about, do you see in this text? How does it speak to us?
I think we have is linked with the last question, the last time. Also this, because I think we have a big problem of narrative of our history. Narration or narrative, not is only one. There is a narrative of the winner, narrative of the multinational, narrative of the invasion of the migrants that, push the public opinion to sustain, for example, the closed borders, political action or other inhuman condition. And I say in the New Gospel, and one thing very important, another way for write together a new narrative about our action of resistance, our project, our desires, our dreams. And this way is very interesting because it's a way to the future, but linked with the old past. Is a narrative of one movement, human movement that is complementary to the capitalistic movement, liberalism movement, and power, and so. And I think it's very interesting for us have this narrative also about the spiritual part of our movement, not only material part. Material is the condition. Material is the action. Material is the consequence of our action. For example, for us on the sea, we go, and material is the life that we save to the dead. Is an incredible action for me. Is the biggest for my imagination, no, for my happiness. But there is another part, a spiritual part. Is very important that in this world that is a digital world, we have also a part that speak about the quality of our relationship, of our reasons. I think that if I think that these persons, that woman, men, and children that coming from Libya is my brothers, my sisters, not is a slogan, is a particular vision of a relationship between human persons, and is a particular vision also for the planet, because climate change movement, anti-climate change movement, speak about also Pope Francis, speak about the planet, the life of the planet, Mother Earth. This problem for the left in particular is like heresia, is like heretic when we speak about spiritual situation. But I think in this time, in this epoch, we not have afraid about spiritual problem. We move for something that we have inside. Don't all is rationality. There is a part, depends this part of our vision of the world, not its rationality. We know that if we stay together in solidarity and in love, is better that we stay without love, without respect. This point is very fundamental point, because materialistic vision not is in contradiction with spiritual vision also. And I say I look this in gospel process and new gospel process, and for example in Palermo events, I have a big impression of this courage for say this. I have big impressions look even like Jesus. Is very good, because we must have a link with the history. We fight not with we are not alone. We are not the first. We are not the last.
Then also to you, Yvon, what does this text, the New Gospel, but also the project in which you participated, mean for you as an activist?
Well, of course, Miller-Rowe has always managed to find an original way of approaching this complex issue at hand. And there are so many persons that associated this title chosen by Miller-Rowe as some sort of provocation, the New Gospel. So as if there had been two Gospels, this is how they perceived this title. But I always kept telling people that the Bible is not just the only reference for Christians. The Bible today, well, we can say that it is also the biggest instrument for laypersons today, because if you look at what is going on in society, even things that laypersons experience go back to what the Bible says. Miller-Rowe is also a person interpreting the Bible more than also self-declared Christians. For me, it means more and goes beyond just going to the Mass. And Matteo Salvini often instrumentalized religion, and being a Christian for me is, of course, practicing what is written in the Holy Scripture, because the message that is enshrined in the Bible is a universal message, and it can be reproduced and reiterated everywhere, going beyond cultures, going beyond religions, and going beyond all of our origins. So as I told you from the outset, it is not just about what people pretend to be as self-declared Christians, but it has to go back to what is written in the Bible. And I believe now what is still topical 2,000 years on, and I think even today, Jesus Christ would be close to the poor, to the impoverished, to the suffering, people who suffer, to migrants. He would be close to those being exploited, and he would be also next to Italians, Africans, also in the midst of people. Jesus would be on the sides of the poor and not with rich people, just like it says in the Bible. The poor people are the ones that arrive in paradise first, not the rich persons. And Milo Rau found this original way of approaching things and to convey this message to everyone in the world, if it's the world of believers or non-believers. He said that this film just states that those that believe in something, those that have the faith, should not push back others, should actually not turn their backs on others. Just like Pope Francis says, we have to be against racism, against barbarism, etc. So he intentionally addressed the Christians of today and wanted to also turn to the non-Christians to tell them, well, Jesus Christ was there. He was followed by the disciples, and even if you don't believe in him, he was one of you, he was one of us. And I'm telling it to you, trade unionists, for instance. He was also an activist like you. He fought for people's rights. He joined in the struggle. He initiated the struggle against the rich people of the time. And he stood up for the rights of impoverished people. He was an activist, a trade unionist, a militant person as well, as you could translate this concept to today's world. And Jesus was all of that, embodied all of that. And the new gospel links up the religious world with the non-religious world. And this is the originality of Milo Rau, being inspired by what we're witnessing today, the problems we grapple with what happened in the past.
Hearing all that, Lorenzo, and referring to the things that both Yvon and Luca said, and before we were talking about the glue to bring people together, to mobilize together, what do you think? Could this be an intellectual source for creating this glue, or what are the intellectual sources theorists would be working with?
Allow me to play the atheist in this group. I have a view of the Pope that is similar to the view that I have of Mario Draghi to some extent. I think Mario Draghi's government today is, unfortunately, the best option for the country at the moment, given that the alternative is a fascist government in 2 months' time. And that is precisely the tragedy. This Pope, is possibly, with the exception of reproductive and gender questions, the only truly left-wing international leader in the world. And that is also a tragedy, to be honest with you, because I would like this to be a secular dimension. I would like to see many secular leaders at the stature of Pope Francis and not to have to go to the church. which I think is an outdated institution, to find this kind of progressive spirit. But as we were saying before, we live in tragic times, and so there we go. Tragedies is all that we have to work with. But when it comes to the new gospel, of course, I'm joking, just in part. When it comes to the new gospel, I think, of course, there is. It's very hard. Let me say that. First, it's very hard, and I think it was really slightly crazy of Milo Rau to try and do a film on migration, because it's very hard to make works of art that deal with migration today. Not only because there is a bit of an overdose of them, but because when one gets so close to touching human suffering for something that is immediately reified and enters a market, enters a star system, it's very easy to end up like Ai Weiwei with that picture of Ai Lan, which I think is absolutely the death of art, and also the death maybe of the dignity of an artist. But I think Milo Rau actually and the team and Eva Maria Bersch and all the team of the Institute IPM pulled it through for at least a couple of reasons. One, it's got to do with what Ivan was saying. The Christian mythology is obviously an extraordinarily powerful influence, especially in the present of our geographical area. So white Europe, the white West, it's something that we think is our own, something that defines our identity. And to collapse that in a gesture that really explains the kind of global realism that is also present in other works, to collapse that with the question of migration, to place Ivan in the figure of Jesus, sends a short circuit of signals in people's subconscious, maybe not the spirit that Luca was mentioning, but certainly the psychic energies of people, that triggers a realization that actually what Luca was saying before, that they are my brothers and sisters, maybe is actually true. And maybe it's something that I can begin to see by seeing it enacted in a story, in a myth that has shaped my own consciousness as a white Christian European. And that collapsing of these narratives, I think, is extraordinarily important and effective. And the myth of Christ has always played that role. It's a myth that's been, on the one side, taken by the power of the church, the establishment, a kind of institutionalization of obedience. But on the other, it's always been an extraordinarily radical narrative. From Münster, I mean, in Germany, you know this very well, from the Christian rebellions that merged with a social and economic demand in Germany, especially in the 1500s, so on and so forth, are extraordinarily powerful. So it's important to take this myth and reclaim it in the way that the New Gospel does. This is partly of what I would call a mythopoetic act, of really working within and working through a myth in a way that reshapes it and hence transforms our understanding of our own position, our own being in the world, to quote another German. The final thing to say, though, is that I think the New Gospel goes farther than that. It's not just rewriting a myth or playing this tug of war or pulling Jesus towards the good guys and not towards the other side, but it's doing something I think is very important and very innovative. It's actively transforming reality by engaging with it. And so the fact that the film works with people who actually work in the camps and in the fields, the fact that through an engagement in the film, those who take part, those who star in the film, take part in a process almost of political subjectivization. The film reinforces the political protagonism of really existing struggles and movements on the ground, to the extent that, for example, a house is built as a result of the mess that the film has caused in Matera and the connections that the film has enabled in Matera. This transforming of reality through the shooting of a film is, I think, extraordinarily innovative, goes a bit in the direction that we were discussing with regarding Mediterranea before, of actually changing things as you describe them, as you look at them, as you theorize them. And it's, for me, an actually novel artistic form of expression, which in a previous joke with Milo, I called Hegelian, because somehow reality is transformed by its description. What happens at the end of the process of shooting the movie transforms the symbolism and the significance of the movie itself ex post. So I think this is truly interesting, and I thought it was going to be a failure, and I was happy to be proved wrong, that it's still possible to do very interesting works dealing directly with the question of migration. I'm happy that Milorao is not Ai Weiwei. Doesn't take much.
We will turn to the questions of ours at the very end of our conversation. But I would like now to take the opportunity also referring to a question that came from the audience. And perhaps, Luca, you want to be the first answering to it. The question of the audience was regarding indifference. So rephrasing it is, how can we break the indifference surrounding us? How can we break also the bubble we move in? The people that are watching us now is probably a group that in some way is defined and also somehow closed. How can we confront others with your work, with your experiences, and how can we raise awareness or invite them to join our fights?
It's a big problem, this, because the power don't make a simple action for influence the public opinion, but building the public opinion about through the shock strategic point, no? And the power not limit to produce the public opinion directly, but produce also the your imagine, our imagine. And I think we must break this imagine with the two way. One is concrete action. We not can is in all the situation. Philosophic and political and debate situation or action on camp, on the sea, on the land, and the concrete action with project, because action not is a sporadic action like demonstration, and so is a way of life. A way of life is our life. This is the point. The fight of Ivan and the other comrade in Sicily or in Puglia or in other with knock-up process, not is a episodic situation. Is a way of life. Is a project of life, no? And this is the point. Also, the situation in the Mediterranean is a way of life for us, because for many of us is all the time now. There are many activists that work about this, and I think this is a first point. We don't afraid if is a concrete action. In the start, this concrete action probably is minority action, close action, and so. The other problem is language. We must use all the language, artistic language. Poetic language, spiritual language. We must use all, because for broke this situation of closing enclave and description by the power about us, about our problem. And I think this is two way is good, and the other is exchange. With all the experience, we must force our tendencies to stay at our home, in our action point. We must force this with change experience. With now it's very difficult with the pandemic, but with the meeting, for example, physical meeting, and we discover the revolutionary property of friendly situation, for example, no, and different situation. I think it's very good if Ivan coming in Mare Jonio and in Mediterranean for visit and speak about the experience of knock-up, and the Mediterranean go in the knock-up situation and speak with the other person about our experience. And so also is very good, this experience of today, for example. I think this is the way, but not afraid, because it's a way of life. We are minority, but that have vision majority. This is the point. We think to the world, for the world. The other is majority, but think only in their garden, and not can have a vision of the world.
Their garden or their personal interests, or very particular interests.
Yes. Or
Perhaps,
the garden, or the suite of the big hotel and big Trump palace and blah blah blah.
then also to Yvonne, this question of how can we break the indifference, the blindness of others, and how can we ourselves in our work increase the people we reach?
Well, I believe that indifference today is one of the major results brought about by the system we have at the moment, by the reigning system. So power structures that has filled us with indifference. And this is something also enshrined in our communication habits that fed and nourished our indifference. Also, economic powers have oriented our actions and our beliefs, our feelings. So I believe that if you want to fight against indifference today, you would have to work towards acting on two levers. We need to focus on communication more. On the one hand, we need to educate people, raise awareness, and on the other hand, we would have to try and change the economic system that we are faced with today. When it comes to the economy, for instance, when you have a student, for instance, sometimes students listen to speeches, a speech that I held on modern slavery in Italy. And this student came up to me after that I gave that talk and said that she now had more awareness about those facts, and that this inspired her to join in that fight and to spread out the word and to reach out to other people. And she asked me whether I could give her a hand and fight against exploitation. And when she asked me that, she also asked me, well, how are we able to find a product where we can be sure that there is no such thing as exploitation behind it in the production? And I told her, well, it's quite a hard thing to do. She wanted to know, how can I go to Lidl and find out how products are produced? But what happened afterwards is that the student that I'm talking about 1 week after came back to a supermarket thinking about what she bought. But the thing is, how can we avoid her to become indifferent again at some point in the future? We would have to change the economic system towards greater justice, towards better values to combat indifference on the part of individuals. So this is to say, if we don't manage to make for greater sustainability, ecological sustainability, it will be difficult. We've made a lot of mistakes, and now we fight against injustice. We fight in favor of persons and their social rights, their civil rights. This is the first thing we can do without changing the entire system. If you ask a left-oriented person what type of an economic system he or she would want to have, they are going to give you all sorts of different answers. But this is one thing. But on the other hand, maybe this would be too abstract for people to truly understand. It's not specific and concrete enough. So the fact of having a fair economy, an equitable economy based on environmental sustainability, based on redistribution of the riches, based on decent working conditions, leads to a situation where people can change the way they look at their society. And on the other hand, you need to choose the right way of communicating to people. Silvio Berlusconi achieved his power in society thanks to his controlling part of the communication in our country. And he changed the mindsets of parts of youngsters, of parts of one generation in Italy, that became a lot more indifferent towards a number of problems. I mean, there are so many people dying in the sea today, which has become quite a normal thing for some people, that it's become normal for them to watch others suffer because they've gotten used to this new consumerism model by way of this communication type following one program. So we should pinpoint communication in a different way today. But this, unfortunately, is not a priority in our system, in our world today. And what I would like to add is that I fully second what Luca said. We have to join forces today. We have to pool our strengths. We have to be perseverant in our fight. We have to keep up the fight. And I did so when I was little and when I arrived in Italy as well. And I worked also in the section of the Communist Party. People got rallied, people joined forces, they worked together in communities and reached out to others that were maybe not necessarily the biggest intellectuals, but they were able to exchange and to join forces, think about the system. And those people have managed to be inspired by those values. And this is what is also become part of what we do in our generation today. Some of us have parents who did not go to school, who were not educated, who didn't follow and have a higher education. They could not participate in debates and exchanges of that sort. But still, this is what we can do now. But this is what we lack as well, unfortunately. And I'd like to conclude by saying that this joint fight is material, is essential. So the class struggle is something that is still valid today. We've got the class of the rich and the wealthy ones and the class of the impoverished. And it's about keeping up the fight, keeping up the struggle, not just taking to the streets, but to roll up our sleeves and to fight sustainably. And this is an element that will lead us towards freeing ourselves and fighting against this indifference that we're faced with today. And we took to the streets for 2 months. We organized strikes. We organized uprisings in order to fight against the situation. Cassarini, for instance. I mean, we need those people who are prepared to take up the fight in order not to fall back into this indifference that Luca just mentioned.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that also in the after talk, after the screening of the new gospel that we will have today, you will continue commenting on these things. And something that happens all this week in the School of Resistance is that time is too short for really having the conversations at the length we would desire to have. And the good thing is that the School of Resistance is hyper-mobile, tiny object which can travel around, pop up, enable decentralized conversations, land something at a specific social terrain. We have heard how important this is as a practice, but then also be mobile again for reconnecting somewhere else. And I hope very much that we can continue the conversation that we are having right now at some different point. Also, something I wanted to share, because I'm so deeply impressed with everyone that I'm talking about and with this week, is the personal commitment, biographic commitment everyone is giving. And there's one quote I had prepared for today from the actor and philosopher Mehdi Qassem, who says, "Modern heroism means either standing up by your own example, your autobiography, or shutting up." And all of you are not shutting up, but you are standing up with your own biography, and that impresses me a lot. And it's now time for me to announce how the audience can watch the new gospel. Perhaps you have heard it is only available in Germany and Austria, and you have to go to the website of the Akademie der Künste or of Schaubühne Berlin. So, for instance, www.adk.de, and there you will find a description of how to access the movie. The same is valid for Schaubühne Berlin. And I can announce that the movie will be released in Swiss, Belgium, and Netherlands in April, and also later on in many other places in the months to come. And the last thing that remains for me is to thank the audience at home, but especially also the three of you. Grazie a voi.
Grazie.
Thank you. I say that if you want to watch it, you can say it. I can. If you want to watch it from outside Germany and Austria, you can use a VPN, because after the revolution, copyright will be dead. So there are ways of maneuvering.
I guess that some barriers have been built up. I don't know that exactly. Hope to see you soon. Hope that we can have conversations like this all together in the same room. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
E alla prossima.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for my English.
No, è stato bellissimo.
It's this Catholic guilt as Luca has now.